It's Sunday, October 6th, 2024. Welcome to Nation Watch from wherever you're joining us. Today we'll be discussing a number of issues that are important to the Guyanese society. With me is the leader of the parliamentary opposition, leader of the People's National Congress Reform, Mr. Aubrey Norton. Mr. Norton, welcome to Nation Watch once again, and it's a pleasure to have you twice running.
Good afternoon to all Guyanese and both at home and in the diaspora and those viewing generally. And thanks for having me, Mervyn.
I want to start off on a subject that is on the minds of every well-thinking Guyanese. The official list of electors. We discussed this, I think, 2 Sundays ago with Mr. Vincent Alexander, who is the longest serving commissioner at the Ghana Elections Commission, and we heard his views from a technical perspective. Now, the last census conducted in Guyana was in 2012 rather, and our population declared at that time was 746,955 persons. Recently released official list of electors in Guyana by the Ghana Elections Commission is 718,715, right up there with the national population last estimate, last official numbers. Talk to us, Mr. Norton, about this whole question of this list, which is clearly padded.
This is an old issue, and it is unfortunate that the PPP goes back to their old behavior. There was some agreement a while ago that we will generally redo the list and update the list. Of course, you know, the PPP in the last elections went to the courts, and for some reason it was ruled that you cannot make changes to the voters list. You cannot remove people. I didn't find it a very sensible decision, but I sense it's the law, and so one has to live with it. But even apart from that, I have said that we have changed our rules over the years, and that the parliamentary opposition is willing to give support to the government to change the rule to ensure that we can have a clean voters list. One has to understand that an election is aimed at getting the popular will, knowing the will of the people. Mm-hmm. If you have a padded list, it is well nigh impossible to get the will of the people. And so we are starting from a very bad place if we go down the road of continuing with this list, because the elections will not necessarily reflect the will of the people. And the purpose is to reflect the will of the people. Of course, we have been clamoring for biometrics, because we do believe that if we get a clean voters list and biometrics, what will happen is that you will reduce the irregularities that the PPP become involved in. It will ensure that there is one person, one vote, because biometrically, you know, no two people are the same. And so we will continue to push for biometrics. We welcome the fact that there's some rumblings from inside of the Ghana Elections Commission that they're willing to go down the road of biometrics. It is opposite to note here, right, that every observer to the last elections 2020 made the point that there is need for a clean voters list. Even Barrett Jack Dale, who flip-flops, had said in 2015 when they lost that there was need for biometrics in a clean voters list. In his typical style, he changed his mode and he doesn't want a clean voters list. Now, we need to get a clean voters list. We need to get biometrics if we believe or if we want the election results to reflect the will of the people. And you don't have to go far to know that it is ridiculous. It makes little or no mathematical sense. If you claim that you give cash grants to 200,000 households to 250,000 children, still with the children, what that means is that that amount of children are 17 and under. Rarely would you have one at 18.
Mhm.
So if you take out the school population, if you take out the under 18, Ghana should not have a list that passes 600,000. And so it is evident that the government knows full well that the list is bloated, but it suits their interests because they believe in far-flung areas like they did in the 2016 elections. They can get involved in rigging. And so they don't want to change the list, but we'll continue to push for a clean voters list and biometrics because we believe it's the right thing, and we believe it is the only way that it will be a reflection of the way the people of Guyana.
There's all there's already a form of biometrics being used in the registration process and in the maintenance of records of voters process. That is the manual fingerprinting exercise that have not yet been digitized as far as I'm aware. Mr. Alexander, in his capacity as commissioner, has expressed a level of confidence that by the time available for the holding of elections, the Ghana Elections Commission, if the will is there, can achieve what is required to have biometrics at the place of poll in time for the next election. Let's talk a little bit about the will of GECOM and the political control of the commission. Do you see GECOM pursuing this, even though it's actively on their agenda, they're discussing it? Do you see them going the distance with this?
Well, it is difficult for me to say whether they will go the distance. A lot of what happens at GECOM is dependent on the government because um, the present approach of the Ghana Elections Commission would have removed that counterbalance. The counterbalance used to be the two parties having equal votes and therefore had to negotiate and make an agreement. With the advent of Claudette Singh, we have seen that that has been removed. And what essentially happens is the government makes a proposal and the chairman will vote with the government. Now, the first thing that I think needs to be done is for the chairman of the Elections Commission to reassess her role and to be an impartial chairman and allow the scope for negotiations to resolve this problem. If that is allowed, then one can anticipate that it can be done. The question of the political will to do it is a big issue because I do not believe the government has the political will. As the government recognizes that it is losing support, even among its supporters, more and more the government will want to hold on to the flawed system because that is their opportunity to obtain an advantage. We have got to continue to pressure the government, engage the international community, and ensure that we have biometrics because, like Mr. Alexander would have said, there is everything in place. It's just for you to digitalize it and do what you have to do. And then the machines that you or the equipment that you use can be easily obtained anywhere in the world that has it. And so I believe it is a function of the political will of the government, and that is what is lacking. To the extent that GECOM, as presently operates in the interest of the government, then that puts it squarely at the feet of the government to develop the political will to allow us to move forward, have biometrics, and have elections that reflect the will of the people. I don't think Ghana needs another election in which at the end of it, the results are in question. And if the PPP believes in democracy, if the PPP wants to be honest and have free and fair elections, then they will agree and let us have a clean voters list and biometrics.
The shorter the time to effectively put in place biometrics at the place of poll can compromise the effort to accomplish that mission. What is required is a reasonable window of time. So it means that if we're going to go down the road of biometrics, the process has got to start now.
Well, you must not rule out the PPP's approach. Let me tell you what the PPPs, there's a possibility they do here. They know you want biometrics. They know you want a clean voters list. If they believe that they're on the losing end and they need time, they can go very close to the election time and then say, let us have biometrics. Of course, that will be dependent on the opposition support, but one must not rule it out. I think the PPP generally tries its best to ensure that it achieves its objectives, even if it's against the interests of the people of Ghana. And one has to keep one's eye on that. And therefore, it is in that circumstance, I would say that not only must we get biometrics in the clean voters list, we must get it in time to have elections on schedule. And that is what is critical.
And the demonstrations, picketing exercises, demanding a clean voters list, and as well as the domestic and international campaign continues.
Yes, they must. We cannot stop demanding a clean voters list and biometrics. The two of them are critical to success of the next election. It will lessen the burden, because if you don't get that, you have to put a lot of resources into monitoring the election, scrutinizing it. You will have to put a lot of resources into fighting off the fear that the PPP instill, though we have developed some strategies that we can use in that circumstance. We prefer not to be in that situation. And so if we could get it early and create a kind of a level playing field, then that will be in the interest of all the people of Guyana.
There's another there's another telling move on the cards by Ali that seem to be targeting elections in the minds of some people with whom I've spoken. The confirmation of Clifton Hicken as Commissioner of Police. Mr. Hicken is known to be supportive of the PPP. He's known to be campaigning for the PPP. And it is widely accepted that the police force is one that is politically directed. Outside of the consultations and so on, do you see, because we're going to come to that in a minute, do you see the move to confirm Hicken as being connected to the whole business of the electoral process?
There might be a link. The Clifton Hicken issue is a complicated one. First of all, he's past retirement. Well, I shouldn't say complicated. It's one can be handled simply if there is interest in the rule of law. Mm-hmm. He's past retirement age. His qualifications are suspect. His competence suspect. He has been politically involved. People in Mocha could tell you that he went in there from the time the government changed and began his campaign for the People's Progressive Party. So he's a political partisan. I believe the PPP would like to have a Clifton Hicken there because he's compromised. And the best way to control people is to compromise them. He's well compromised. The leadership of the Ghana Police Force is compromised. But also do not rule out them throwing Hicken under the bus by just appointing him for a short period so that he can get his benefits, and then they bring who they actually want. One can never be sure with the approach of the People's Progressive Party. The People's Progressive Party is not a party that operates based on law. It's not a party that has any moral compass. It is headed by two persons who have lost their moral bearings, and so one has to prepare for any eventuality in this situation.
Now, there's a bit of a contradiction here. On the one hand, you have made it very clear and in writing, far and wide, that you offered your agreement to the president with respect to appointment of the two top judicial officers, the Chancellor of the Judiciary and the Chief Justice. The appointment of these two judicial officers require the agreement of the leader of the opposition, and you've made that agreement public. Notwithstanding that, the president has failed, omitted, refused to appoint these two judicial officers. On the other hand, you have signaled clearly that you will, under no set of circumstances, support the confirmation of Clifton Aiken for the reasons you just outlined and some others you outlined before, including misconduct, perhaps, or allegations of misconduct in public office. Why would a head of state, a head of government, a commander-in-chief of the armed forces, snub the judiciary, which is an arm, one of three independent arms of government, and embrace a political police force?
Because it suits them to have a political police force. If you have a political police force, when those that are close to you commit crimes, then you can manipulate the force and have them go free. I mean, we're still waiting on charges and so for critic. I haven't heard of any. You know full well that the evidence suggests that certain persons were complicit in the murder of paper shots. Mm-hmm. You know that suddenly all the footage from our CCTV cannot be accessed. And so what you see is the use of the police force to achieve their political objectives. And if you look across the ambit, let's go back to the alleged rape case. Mm-hmm. That also is an indication that it is the control of the police force by the political directorate that caused Darren Lal to still be a free man. Mm-hmm. So clearly, they like political control. We turn now to the judiciary. I sense they are not sure as it relates to the judiciary. And I sense that they believe that if the two persons are acting, then they are more vulnerable. If you appoint them, that provides the scope for them to exercise the constitutional right in an independent manner. Mm-hmm. And so what the PPP does here is play swords of Damocles politics and hold the swords of Damocles over the head of the judiciary. Look at Barrett Jackdale's outburst when Kissoon ruled in a particular way. Mm-hmm. That is indicative of a man who doesn't want the law to prevail. He wants what he thinks is right to be right. And if you have an independent judiciary, that would not be possible. And so for them, they seem to be comfortable with the Chancellor and the Chief Justice in acting positions because it creates the kind of vulnerability they want. So I would say that the major problem is that the People's Progressive Party does not believe in an independent judiciary. They mout democracy, but they have no interest in separation of powers. As far as they're concerned, they must control the courts. And when they are not getting control, any magistrate or judge that challenges their position, you see what happened to them. We can go back to the Gita Chandan case, mm-hmm. where she sought to uphold the law and she became enemy number one. So one has to put this thing in context. You are dealing with people who are mouting democracy, but they do not believe in democracy. Everything that, whatever they do, they are aimed at destroying democracy. You politicize the police force. It means that can no longer operate independent. You pack all the commissions with PPP hacks. You didn't choose to put independent people who can operate based on law and independently. If you look at the police commission, the teacher service commission, the young lady from Linden is a known PPP activist. Mrs. Ramson, well, we don't have to say where her political affiliation is. When you look at the Public Service Commission, you see the same thing. So what they are doing is really and truly destroying all the things that are reflective of the development of a democratic society. We see them doing it with the judiciary. We see them doing it with the police. The Guyana Defense Force is heading in the same direction. They are no better. You've had an accident, for the want of a better word, involving senior members of the army. In any democratic society, there would have been a proper investigation, and then the public would know. No, we did a census that is long overdue, and the government continues to hold that census. Some people believe they don't like what they're seeing in terms of the dwindling of their support base. And so they don't want to. From my own perspective, to the extent that you take in so long, you're tampering. And we know they tamper even with exam results. So we wouldn't put it past them to tamper with the census. But when you look at all the institutions that can contribute to the development of a democratic society, let's turn to the Ethnic Relations Commission. They only investigate if the person is acting against the interests of the PPP. You have people online calling black people dogs, all kind of thing. And this same Ethnic Relations Commission that wrote me a garbage letter to tell me about ethnic issue when I made a comment during the local government election that had nothing to do with race. This same Ethnic Relations Commission can do nothing. It does nothing about credible allegations of race. And so even though that commission was put in place after the 2001 reform to help to deal with race and racism, it cannot, because the very appointments you make or the government made are political persons who are controlled by the PPP. If you look at the Public Accounts Committee, the Public Accounts Committee, the intention was it will scrutinize the accounts of government. The PPP is so corrupt and do not want the 2020 to now accounts scrutinized. So they went and changed the rules governing it so that the committee, rather than being independent, becomes dependent on government support. And then, as you know, the government doesn't turn up. And so many meetings in public accounts do not occur. And up until now, the scrutiny of the 2021, 2022, 2023 accounts are nowhere in sight. That is again an indication that the government does not believe in democracy. They mouth democracy, but all of their actions are clear indication that they are anti-democratic. Which government that likes its people, in which citizens carry a matter to court, and the judge ruled that there should be a parent company guarantee, will challenge it? So not only are they anti-democratic, anti-judiciary. They are even prepared to go against the interests of the people of Guyana in support of their narrow political and economic interests. And so I think Guyana is deeply in a crisis.
You've taken it very wide there, Mr. Norton. But I want to zero in back on the Hicken issue, if you don't mind. Now, Gail Teixeira wrote you, pointing out all the glorious reasons why the PPP believe that Hicken should be confirmed. Among the issues she pointed out, a reduction in serious crimes. She pointed to the management of the police force and so on. Now, when it comes to serious crimes, drug trafficking is not included in the statistics.
It's murder, rape, and
And robbery, basically, and some other one of them. But so there's an upsurge in criminal activity with respect to drug trafficking, with 4.4 tons of cocaine being found at one location, and semi-submersible vessels, I believe 5 or 6 of them, found in the Northwest region, all being used or intended to be used or have been used in the transport and trade of illicit drugs. Now, if the numbers were properly stacked, I mean, clearly the Guyana police force would be statistically in a mess. But there's also the issue of serious allegations of corruption against top officers of the Guyana police force. Yet the PPP has expressed confidence in the police force and its management. On the other hand, the judicial officers are doing their work diligently, and they continue to uphold the rule of law within that independent arm of government. Why? Why would Ali not confirm these people and go for Hicken? I mean, and secondly, what measures are in place or are likely to be put in place? What should citizens expect from the parliamentary opposition in the face of a potential confirmation of Clifton Hicken as Commissioner of Police?
we have already said we'll take legal action, we'll take the matter to the parliament, but do not forget, you deal with a barefaced government, and those things don't affect them. Like I said, they have no moral compass. And so one can anticipate that they will seek to go ahead and appoint Hicken. The fact that Gail Teixeira could stick her head in the sand and not recognize when you do that you are exposed is in itself an issue, because anyone who lives in Guyana would know that the crime situation has gotten worse under Hicken. Anyone who lives in Guyana will know that under Hicken, if PPP people become involved in crime, they are protected. You have everyday issues, and this is one brought to my attention recently, where people are abusing others using race. There's a recent case in which a man was very abusive. I submitted the number to the police, etc. But the police will not act on it because they are protecting the PPP elite. And mind you, it is an indictment on any commissioner of police. Let's assume perchance that he isn't involved in corruption, even though there are serious allegations against him. You must be held responsible for the men below you. And many of them, there are serious allegations of corruption against them. And so you have a situation in which Gail Teixeira is prepared to write that people have confidence in the Guyana police force, when she knows full well that people have no confidence in the Guyana police force. She knows full well that the officers in the police below that top 5 are complaining bitterly about the mismanagement of the Guyana police force. And so to come and say that there is confidence in Hicken and the Guyana police force is clearly a case of a political statement that makes no sense to the average man. It's just like how they disown or seem to believe that there isn't an increase in the cost of living. So you are in a situation where they have to protect each other. The government has to protect Hicken, and Hicken has to protect the government. When a society has gangsters operating, and then those gangsters linked to political power and to the police, what in essence you have is a system of gangsterism. Clive Thomas pointed out before the last government in 2015 that it was a criminalized state. Now that criminalized state is more and more concentrating economic and political power in the hands of gangsters. And when that would have happened, you don't just have an ordinary criminalization of the state. You have a gangsterism that is emerging. If you link that with illegal drugs and trafficking in persons, they have negative consequences for the Guyanese society. How are you going to take guns off of the streets of Guyana when the people in charge of the Guyana police force are themselves involved in the illegalities? So we are in a very dangerous and precarious situation. When it comes to the judiciary, they just do not want a functioning judiciary. They are just living with the fact that if they go too far into the judiciary, it might solicit international response. And so they are compromising the judiciary, but being very careful not to go overboard so that they are categorized as a complete dictatorship.
But should not the appointment of or the confirmation of a person in the office of Commissioner of Police with all the allegations spewing around, the fact that he has passed the age of retirement, should that not come or draw the attention of the international community as it did in the case of Henry Green, when the Americans clearly said they're not prepared to work with him, notwithstanding which Jagdeo appointed him? And if that happens, is it a case where legal measures are the only recourse?
I would not run down the road, or let me put it differently. The international community has a way of doing their work quietly, because there are also dangers in doing it publicly. And I have no doubt that they would have signaled their objection to the appointment of Hicken. But then you yourself pointed out that there was an objection from the international community to Henry Green appointment, and he was appointed. So I would not rule out them doing that. Of course, the consequences will be severe, but I do not think the PPP can afford a commissioner that is independent and operating based on law, and that is what will guide them.
In your letter to the government, I believe it was addressed to Gail Teixeira.
No, the president.
The president.
I don't write Gail Teixeira.
Right. So, in your letter, you pointed out to the allegations of corruption at the highest level of the police force. Should the government signal its intention to solicit and secure international assistance investigating those allegations, as well as allegations of corruption against senior government officials, would that put you in a position where you would be prepared to negotiate other issues with the government?
It is very hypothetical. I don't see this government trying to get international support. In the Henry Boyce case, when international support was there, and in fact, at least one person came to help, the police itself did not provide them with information. And so, even if they make a verbal commitment to having that kind of investigation, one cannot go out there saying we will support it, because you can have them signal that. And then when the investigators come, they do the same things they did with the Durham fire at Madhya, the same thing they did with the killing of the Henry boys. So if one deals based on just historical facts, the PPP has no interest in a proper investigation into anything in which they are complicit in. You had a crime spree, and it is only the international community input that caused them to get rid of Gajraj. And if something as troubling as that, they weren't prepared to operate as a government, then I don't see them going down that road. Have you ever imagined if Brutus, Hicken, and company start talking what will happen to the government?
Interesting. So my final question on this particular subject is there not a constitutional breach currently? Well, not is there, but would there be a constitutional breach were Ali to go ahead and appoint and confirm Hicken, having regard to the fact that there's a legal interpretation of meaningful consultation, and that that interpretation does not apply to anything at all in the circumstances?
Yes, it would be a breach, but they are known for breaching the Constitution. So a breach for them is normal. Let us not forget the approach of this government. They are not a democratic government. They have no interest in democracy. So you cannot apply values that should be in a democratic society to dealing with the People's Progressive Party. They do not live by law. And if you listen to Anil Nandlal, you will see a manifestation of the wider government that it is they who determine, and if they can't determine, they will fight even against the law. So I do not look forward. For me, the solution here is changing the government. And one has to strategize and do everything within our powers to change the government. I believe that the people of Guyana, they are clamoring for a new government. They are clamoring for an end to PPP domination and control. And our focus should be on galvanizing the people of Guyana to end PPP domination and control.
Let's shift to let's shift to this whole breakdown in the national procurement process. You have, and indeed the parliamentary opposition has been hammering away at this whole business of the absence of accountability and transparency in the procurement process, violation of tender proceedings, and the whole business of no checks and balances to ensure that things operate the way they need to operate. In the face of that kind of publicity, Jagdeo has, he has appeared to taken a step backward, and he's now talking about examining what's happening in the procurement process and bringing to justice people who are complicit in law breaches and so on. But at the same time, the procurement process afforded Mr. Jagdeo's friend and associate 40 lots of in a tender procedure that resulted somewhere in the region of $7 billion being being voted in the favor of that person. Is it a case where this is another smoke screen?
Jack Doe is corrupt. The entire process is corrupt. I've said before, if Jack Doe and Fanali can take their assets and put it against their earnings, I am prepared to resign because they can't. Now, if they are as corrupt as they are, how do you expect that they can manage a procurement system that isn't corrupt? When Jack Doe comes out and going on about corruption, it is because corruption is having a negative impact on them and the PPP. He's not anti-corruption. The people that benefit the most from this present economic situation is the people close to Jack Doe. The only conflict exists now, as I understand it, is that Jack Doe had his corrupt cabal, and they are now being challenged by Fanali corrupt cabal. Mm-hmm. And so what you're finding in the PPP is that there is a clash over the distribution of the wealth. Mm-hmm. And the Fanali cabal is now moving closer and closer to becoming more powerful economically than the Jack Doe cabal. So this is not an issue about fighting corruption. This is the externalization of the internal fight over corrupt gains. And so one must not be misled and believe Jack Doe has any interest in fighting corruption. He cannot. He will not. Because if they were serious about fighting corruption, they could have started with Jack Doe. He could have said, look, bring international investigators. Let us investigate the allegations made in the Vice News documentary that he, Jack Doe, is allegedly corrupt and involved in bribery. That is where he should start. If he starts there and there is a genuine, competent international investigative team, then we can begin to say, okay, this is more than a smokescreen. But for now, it's a charade to hide the reality of the PPP. The PPP is engulfed in corruption. Virtually every minister, I know a particular minister who I wouldn't call his name, that told a U.S. congressional delegation that his political party is corrupt and that he has been around since Dr. Jagan and he has never seen the PPP as corrupt as it is. And so we cannot be carried away by Jack Doe's antics. Jack Doe gets up and views to distract from what he's doing. He's always creating a smoke screen. But we will stay laser focused on what is happening. How do you give to a friend $7 billion, but raising concerns about the little ones in the procurement process? Let us go back to the auditing issue, where they tried to throw that man Gasai under the bus. All of us knew that Gasai could not do that without the PPP consent. And when it was so obvious, I gathered they offer him a scholarship, among other things. But we must never be misled by the PPP antics. We have to continue to look at the source. And every time we look at the source, we see untold PPP corruption. And many of them have got to protect each other because they are extremely corrupt.
I want to shift focus in the remaining few minutes, Mr. Norton, to this whole issue of the Ministry of Youth, Sports and Culture and Minister Ramson. Widely reported in the press, locally and internationally, is this issue of Mr. Tom, who is the administrator of the Burroughs School of Art, where he was confronted by someone and told um, unacceptable things about his ethnicity. The reports say that the person who did that proceeded to contact the minister directly. In turn, the minister simply summoned Mr. Tom and they had a conversation. Mr. Tom reported publicly that he was told by the minister in no certain terms that his image is not one that is required by the government in the government circles. Today, we had another artist coming out in the Kaichur News disclosing that the curator of the Castellani Art Gallery has been relieved of his responsibilities and they have been usurped by Minister Ramson, who has absolutely no knowledge of art or the history of art in this country. And he has, in protest, decided to cancel all of his intended art exhibitions. He has demanded the resignation of Charles Ramson, as so many other persons have done, including Nima Flubes, parliamentarian for the coalition and shadow minister of youth, sports and culture. What is happening? Why is there this decay when it comes to sensitive matters such as ethnicity and ethnic tolerance in this country?
Ramson might be a product of his environment. And the environment that Ramson was brought up in is one that is not propitiously disposed to fighting racism. And then he goes into his political environment, which is the same. If you bring Stevie Wonder, he will see that Charles Ramson is incompetent and shouldn't be a minister. I do not think that Charles Ramson understands anything about culture. If you see how he operates, he's restricted to fixing grounds and shaking hands with teams. There's no vision for sport. He doesn't understand culture. And when it comes to youth, he's at sea. They have no youth policy. They have a hodgepodge of youth programs, but not a program that is structured to empower young people. I have said that a government led by us will relook our youth policy, which was adopted in the National Assembly, bring it up to date, and become involved in some comprehensive programs to deal with our youth. First, early childhood education, a national system, so that we begin to nurture our children very early. Second, we focus on getting the primary school up and running and ensuring that by the time our children meet a certain age, they have the relevant competencies and then move on to secondary. We have said that in terms of the youth, we have to train them in financial literacy and small business development and then give them grants and loans to ensure that they can blossom. I can tell you a young man from Sophia came and we helped him with at this chicken farm. Today he sent me his third batch of chickens, doing well. Now, Ramson is not focused on developing young people. Ramson is what you call a typical puppy show. Has no content and lives on form. You cannot put a critical thing like youth development in the hands of a youth who doesn't understand development. And so I am not surprised with what happened with Tom. I am not surprised with what happened with Stanley Greaves, his letter, because you have thrown this young man outside his
area of competence.
well, not area of competence, outside of everything to do with competence. Mind you, I believe that there are young people that are good and competent. Unfortunately, the two end up being here, youth and incompetence.
In the what we have about 5 minutes or so remaining. Competence aside, should Mr. Ramson not do the decent thing and demit office, or should the president not do the decent thing and fire him for the incident that it revolves around ethnic intolerance, some say outright racism, and his refusal or his failure to acknowledge where he went wrong, his refusal to offer an apology to one of Guyana's celebrated artists, not just because he is a celebrated artist, but because he's a Guyanese citizen. Should he not demit office or be caused to do so?
In a democratic society, he would have had to do that. But like I said, this is not a democratic society. This is a society in which they are corrupt. It's a corrupt government. This is a society in which it's a compromised government, and they have to reinforce each other. When Judicial felt that it had gone so far that it will damage the party, he came out and ensured the demand reinstated. But in that process, he protected Ramson.
It was a disrespected process. Disrespectful process, I beg your pardon.
He what is critical is that he protected Ramson under the guise of being fair and putting Tom back there. Secondly, for less than that, the ERC will write people, not a letter from them, which is an indication that the government condones the racism. If he wasn't condoning racism, why wasn't the police called in to investigate the young lady and what Tom was saying? But you took Tom to your office. You were saying dialogue, as based on what I understand, it was a monologue where this little pompous minister, making his eyes pass, a professional who had served this country and actually did many projects under the PPP. Mm-hmm. And so he was a public servant who wasn't into the partisan politics. But yet you can disrespect him. And all Jack Dew does is come, cover it up, and business as usual. And that is what would have created the condition for what happened to Greaves. Because he now knows that he will get the support of his vice president and his president as he pursues ignorance. Now,
in the exercise of insecurity.
A curator is a professional person and should be allowed to do their job professionally. But PPP domination and control. All that happened here is that young Ramson stretched it a little farther than they would want it stretched publicly. But you are seeing the manifestation of the racism we talk about. In a normal democratic society, Charles Ramson would have had to resign or he would have been forced to resign. But how do you, in the light of serious allegations against the president, the vice president, all of them, ask one man to be decent and resign when you are the creator of the indecency that is now proliferating the public service?
Fitting words on which to bring the curtains down on today's edition of Nation Watch. Mr. Norton, I'd like to thank you very much for sharing time with us. viewers, thank you for joining us from wherever you're joining us and staying the course of the program as you usually do. And I wish to extend to members and supporters of the People's National Congress reform salutations. We recently celebrated a milestone of the party's adoption of its official name, and we're soon to celebrate another milestone of the party's evolving into an institution of its own.
Yeah. And the 13th of February 1955 it was born, and so next year it will be 70 years and we'll celebrate it.
And that's where we started as the Bornamite PPP, and we moved on to the People's National Congress.
And since then we have been distinguishing ourselves from the People's Progressive Party.
Absolutely. So thank you very much again for joining us. Until we meet again next Sunday, God bless.